Hi, Almaz. So can you start off, Almaz, by telling us what is empathy?
Sure. Let me just first say that Ababa, that is a very hard act to follow, and thank you for the wealth of information that you've provided. And one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't speak on this particular event that you spoke on, Emmett Till in 1941 was lynched at the age of 14. To be lynched at the age of 14. So what feeling comes to you when you hear this age and someone being lynched at this age, simply because he was accused of offending a white woman? And what current, in the last month, event in this country does that remind you of? Ask yourself these questions and just let that marinate a little bit and see how far we've come and what feelings come to you. Because that was a very powerful presentation that we just started with, and it's heavy. And if empathy is what you feel, and I'll describe exactly what it is. Emmett Till name I call. Someone is commenting. Yeah, thank you. So at first, let that marinate in the background, but I'll introduce myself too as in continuation, because I do believe that as Black women, in any space that we walk in, we have to identify ourselves as Black. I come to you today to this discussion as a Black woman, immigrant woman, a wife to a Black man, a mother to a Black boy who's only 15 months old, a daughter to a Black man, a sister, an aunt, a cousin, a friend, to Black men and Black boys. The more you use Black in any present, I think that we are a bit, as Habesha people, afraid maybe to say a little bit about who we are. And I think I give myself permission, especially in the last few weeks, to say it out loud and to say it proud, because our Blackness more than ever should be out and proud. And as a person who's in so much rage, when Birri called me about 2 weeks ago to ask me to do this, I told her I'm not ready. Like, I'm just not ready to even provide anything, because I'm just in so much shock as to why we're even here. There's pandemic happening, and then there is this ongoing pandemic of racism that's come to light. Thank God for technology, right? And so to be here today means to me, like, there's so much issues that we're navigating, from global pandemic to what we're seeing and witnessing and watching somebody's life being taken away. As a mom, you're here. Each and every one of you are here because you want to step up and be part of the solution, right? And I have to tell you, each one of you, I may not know you, but that's the most courageous thing to deliver to your children. You're here because you want to be educating yourself. You may already know this information, but you already want to already be here to be part of the solution, to listen, to heal. And so I appreciate you for being here. And I do believe that that's a way we can combat racism in this country, is by coming together and talking, no matter how uncomfortable the discussion is. And I'll speak more on that. Is just be in a room wherever there is, an opportunity presented to us. And so I thank Birri and Almaz and Co. for creating this space for us today. And so today I'll be talking about empathy. I'll be defining empathy. I'll tell you how to say it in Tigrinya and in Amharic. I'm sorry, I can't explain exactly how to say it further than just explaining the definition, just the word. I'll address whether or not empathy is learned, or if it's whether or not it's a trait. I'm getting distracted by the comments. I apologize. Let's see here. I'm just trying to pull up my document. And I'll also talk whether or not, when to start and how to start implementing empathy. And part of Birri's questions were about self-awareness and what we as Habesha people can do to help out in this current circumstances. And there were some questions previously in the last 20 minutes asked, so I hope to address your questions. And my advice would be, after we leave today, that we continue the discussion, and that it doesn't stop in this Sunday afternoon. It just continues with our children, with our parents, with our uncles, with our white colleagues, with our Black colleagues, with everyone, because part of the issue historically has been shying away from talking about racism, afraid from wanting to sound like you're, you know, a victim. You're not. You're simply talking about what's happening and the simple fact of racism does exist in this country. It did not leave us. It's still right here in each room that we're in, whether it's conscious or unconscious, right? So what is empathy? Empathy is your ability to listen, understand, and connect with a person. It's to be able to listen to the struggles of others, even when you can't relate to their stories. It's being curious and not assuming, and also not comparing. It's a human connection when you're able to see another person's view from their world, share and understand what they're going through. For children, you can say to them, if Henok broke his ankle, it is your ability to imagine Henok's pain, right? Being able to say to Henok, the kid being able to say to the other kid, oh, that must really hurt. And seeing Henok's ankle pain from the child, from your perspective, from your son's or daughter's perspective. And that's how you're able to explain it. And I contacted Jakob Tekie, who's a PhD out of Philadelphia, and how to say empathy in Tigrinya. And he described it as سمعت تمكرون تكفال النت. سمعت تمكرون تكفال النت. And then in Amharic, a community mom defined it as hazanet, hazaneta, like feeling hazan with that person. And does anybody, can you type it if you know how to say empathy in Amharic in the comment section? I'd really appreciate it. I want to know myself. And the next question Buri asked me is empathy something that we're born with, or is it something Tigrinya is mikindas? Okay, thank you. I'll take notes. Hazan and Neta. There you go. So check out the notes section because some people are educating us as we speak. Thank you. So is empathy that were we born with this, or are we able to learn in our childhood? Just so the same way we gave the Henok advice just a few minutes ago, it is something that it's learnable. It's not a trait, you know, you're not able to learn. Some may argue that it is, but it is certainly something we can teach our kids about. We can coach our kids through. It's a skill that is renewable, that is evolving, that just we can continue refreshing, right? And it also may depend on where you are in life, right? But it is something that you can continue to tune up. The same way that racism is not something you're born with, I want you to associate, you know, children are not born racist. They're taught to be racist. So empathy can also be taught to children. Is empathy something that needs to happen to non-Black people from us, or just from Black people would be fair to say? I'll address some questions in a moment. Empathy needs to happen from everyone, in my opinion. Right now, we're experiencing human rights issue. Humans' life is being taken away, and we're watching it, and it's happening right now in history. So we need to really think in the same way that Emmett Till and, you know, what happened at Central Park. It should affect all of us regardless of our skin color. It is something that is that's for everyone. Empathy should come from every single person. It's unfortunate that we've been begging certain group of people to feel our pain, but it is something that can come from any and everyone. There's a tendency that some people may be blaming the victim. Mm-hmm. You know, that is not being empathetic. So if you hear someone in saying, you know, George Floyd could have listened to the police officer, or if he didn't try to forge, or, you know, that is simply not obviously empathetic, right? Empathy, you know, is something when you can understand the complexity and history, what Ababa was just talking about. Like, what can those histories, you know, those events in our lives and that continue to happen, what can that do to a person, right? When you can really look at the whole story of the person and the traumas they endured, and how is their trauma currently affecting them. That is how you can empathize with them, being able to see their full self, their full picture, and understanding that there is senseless killing of Black people happening by police, right? And it's been happening for years, and you can apply empathy there, being able to say, you know, the color of our skin is literally criminalized. They're seeing it as a poison. They see you, they're automatically threatened by you. And so there's no chance from the police officer or anyone who is applying trauma onto Black people. They're lacking empathy. So we have to, in our homes, in our living rooms, as we watch TV, we have to speak empathy into these lives that are being dehumanized in our living room, you know, TVs. We have to be able to speak in front of our kids. That is not fair. That is not all that this person is, you know, being able to defend the people who are not able to speak for themselves.
So Almaz, so you're saying, like,
Sure.
with learning empathy in your adulthood, so it's not something that, it's not an innate trait that we're born with, is what you're saying. It's something that,
it's learnable. Exactly. You can talk more. The more you talk about it, the more you're likely able to polish. It's a skill that you can gain.
Yeah.
You can, you know, and at any phase you are in life, you're able to, you know, tune up.
Yeah. So the best way to, I guess, when we have people in our lives that we know, or that we know can't empathize with the African American struggle or where they're at now, the best way to help them find that empathy is to educate them on that historical context. Would you agree with that? I mean,
yeah, and I'll have some actionable items too later on in this presentation. But definitely, like, when you have the voice, I'm here today because I have the privilege to be able to speak, to be able to do research, to be able to interview people. I've interviewed a few kids even before I got here today, my nephews and nieces and my friends' children, being able to utilize that and translate it to a learning moment, you know. And so if you have information, I don't know if you all saw Haley, a young white girl who's challenging her parents. Obviously, I don't recommend, you know, in any way like that kind of a tone, but being able to use the privilege that you have, which in our case, you know, being young and educated and being able to conceptualize the issue that's going on, use your voice and use your privilege to be able to relay, you know, this message to the people who need it in our community. Because and I'll talk about the disconnects. You know, there's a major disconnect. There's a big gap that we have to feel, and we should feel responsible to fill, you know. And the other question you gave me is, where does it start and in what way? I would say we join the fight, right? There's a fight happening in our communities. There's a fight, and, you know, you can fight silently and you can fight loudly. You know, some people feel comfortable speaking out loud, and some people feel comfortable donating. Some people feel comfortable supporting Black businesses in whatever way you can, you know, contribute positively. And the fight is for our future. You know, the fight is an investment for each one of us who are here today. When we fight, we're not fighting because we feel badly for African Americans. We're fighting because our children are Black. You know, we're paving the way and hoping we're giving them a better tomorrow by being here today and by continuing this discussion, right? And it starts at home, you know. And when you start this discussion at home, it's going to get uncomfortable, right? It's not a fun, like, which flavor ice cream do you want? It is actually the most, you know, even for us Black people talking about it, like, right, especially in our Habesha, you know, homes, because we're all at different levels, right? As Abuba said earlier. But starting wherever the person is, and hopefully they get it, and by the end of your conversation, hopefully they will feel this empathy, right? Saying, oh, okay, so that's what, you know, that's what this person's history is like, and that's why they are where they are, right? Because mostly people are making comments in our community because the lack of education and the lack of understanding, and I'll speak more on that later, you know. So the first step, I believe, is if you're not comfortable yourself in how to even discuss the the dialogue or start the dialogue, I would say educate yourself first. And there's plenty of information on University of YouTube or even online. There is wealth of information for free out there that we can simply educate ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The last thing we want is not having these discussions. There are consequences, especially with our children. Some way, somehow in the future, someone will introduce this topic of racism to them. It may not be in a very pretty way, right? And so we want to get ahead of that person that they might come across and having this discussion of what is the history and how could you look like to a white cop, or how could you look like to your white classmate, or how could it look like if you're the only a black person in all white institution, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to get ahead of that, the more, you can never have too much talk about this. And did you have any other questions? Because I was going to go on to self-awareness.
No, you're doing great. You're fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question Biddy asked me is self-awareness. What does it mean? And why is it necessary regarding empathy? You know, I do believe that self-awareness is when you know your why and whatever that you are doing in life and your purpose, when you are aware of your values, and in the current circumstances is when you know yourself well, you're able to say why. I mean, we meaning we as a black people, instead of they, or instead of I, this doesn't affect me, or this doesn't affect mine, you know, so you're able to join right in because you're aware of who you are. I hope that's the question you were asking. And then you're able to connect. When you're able to say we is when you're able to connect on an empathy level, you know, then you're truly able to have empathetic, you're stepping up as yourself and from an empathy-centered mindset. And the next question, which I think is pretty powerful, and someone asks, you know, and I think you want a couple of people to answer this question, and I can answer in how these are from my perspective. And so it's not data focused. I didn't do research in the community. I'm simply talking about my experience. And the question is, there is a disconnect in a culture in the culture and historical experiences between African Americans and Eritrean Ethiopians in America. How can we relate and empathize with African American community? I think that's a very good question, and I would love to hear from other people too. But I do agree that the disconnect has been normalized, has been present and normalized for years in our community. I believe that our generation is a little bit different about it. I think that I see it in my friends, and I see it on social media, and I see it at social functions, that we are a lot more blended into the African American experience in this country. The good news is that we don't have to be disconnected forever. We can nip it in the bud and just, you know, start working. And so I think part of the disconnect is association. And I hope I don't offend anyone by the next, you know, statements that I'm going to say. It's truly coming from the heart and from a place of wanting to change and create the bridge and connection with our African American brothers and sisters. I do believe that many Habesha people associate Blackness with bad, and they operate out of fear when they think of Black people, and I mean African American when I say that, because we are Black. I think they associate it with failing, when you're talim or tukur, that you're going to, you know, fail in life because of you know, or we might say to our children, you can't be with a tukur guy because you will lose your culture, meaning you can't marry one. And also, lastly, I do believe that it's fear of seen differently, or seen as Black, or, you know, as a failure by a white person, or just simply seen as a Black person by a white person, you know, by white people. And I do believe, you know, that we're also living in a society that's highly consumed by media, that's constantly desensitizing us from the issues that are going on, you know, on the grounds, and dehumanizing Black lives, Black people. And I do think so I'm listing problems right now, and I'll go to solution in a moment. and not allowing us, because we have this limited access to African Americans, we rely on the media to help us connect with who they are, and we allow the media to tell us who African Americans are, and we stick to that narrative, which is not usually a great, picture, right? They're either criminals or, and so we stick to that, and not to make excuses. Yeah, go ahead.
So Milan, I'm just seeing the text messages here. Milan says, and I think this is important too. She says that statement you made about Habesha people. She's saying, this is what I've been trying to tell our people. Please say that statement again.
What was the statement that I made? I said a lot.
Yeah. So your statement that that we as Habesha people want to quickly say, don't be like the Black people and be more like this culture or whatever, and how we as Habesha people have bought into that, how we further perpetuate that stereotype and that bias about the African community within our own community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's all in the narrative, and I think that it's the lack of knowing and being given an opportunity to get to know each other.
Yeah.
Because it goes both ways, right? There's African American.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna add to the comment that you just made, and not to bring recent events, but a statement was made by Prime Minister Abiy about the Black community focusing on their pain and not being like the Jewish people and moving on. And I feel like the more distant we are from the issues, the less connected we are. And if that is not the most tone-deaf comment coming from a Black man, I don't know what that is.
Prime Minister at that, no offense to anyone who supports any leaders, but this is not the time to isolate us, from one another. This is a time to bring us together and to think strategically on how we can work together, because we already are, there's already a big gap between us. And so I appreciate you, was that Ababa, for bringing that up. Obviously my recommendation would be not to rely on a major, I didn't either, Tizita. My recommendation would be not to rely on media, but just create your own experiences with African Americans, not just the good, not just, who great things about African Americans, but the historic oppressions that they endured to, and I'll speak more on how we owe them. We owe this to them. The same goes for African Americans, and not to rely on media to know about us. We make jokes, and this is, not to be taken lightly. I feel like what's rooted in our core to even reference as white is right. We make references, I speak Tigrinya, I'm Eritrean. I wish I could say more how it's like in Amharic, but I know I spoke to my Ethiopian friends. But we make references like, whether they're unconscious or conscious. We say things like, this person leads a very white lifestyle, when we're referring to somebody who's living a good life, in our opinion. They have a heart of a Nech or a Tada person, their Tada wedding or their Nech wedding, so when we're referring to these kinds of things, we're perpetuating the issue, and we're adding more to this belief that white is right, and our children are clean slate. They're literally looking at us by to lead by example and to lead by what we value. And so when we instill these kind of so it's like very minor. As someone who studied psychology, I'm always like looking at, body language and references, like to say, white is right in your jokes, you're literally instilling that into your children by normalizing, these kinds of things. So call out anyone and have a healthy discussion. You just made a reference that this person leads like a white, lifestyle. Can we talk about that? Like, what does that actually mean? And actually flushing that out and saying, when you say this, you're saying this to your children, right? Or And see, my next paragraph is about the health disparities. You know, it's very real. And I'll read a quote from the CDC's website that I got. So according to CDC, some minorities experience disproportionate burden to preventable diseases, deaths, and disabilities compared to non-minorities. So a quick shameless plug is I am a founder of Habesha Health, which is an organization that is still in the works, but the goal is to address health disparities in the Eritrean Ethiopian communities, to produce content, video, into Tigrinya and Amharic, to be able to educate our communities, to be able to prevent these preventable diseases that are causing death and including, you know, pregnancies that we're losing over the years, right? And that's because of some of it is lack of education. So the goal is to bridge the gap between our people and the wealth of information that exists. And that, stay tuned. So it's called Habesha Health on social media. And so some of the solutions that I've come up with, and I want to hear more from other people, is that we understand the history of African Americans. What Ababa said spoke on this heavily, so I won't touch on the history. Maybe I'll talk about two events, okay? When we understand someone's history, whether it's a person's level or a whole population of people that we're talking about, I do believe that you can empathize with someone when you know their full story. And empathy and compassion to the systemic oppression that they endured, and to slavery that supposedly ended in 1863, but we know it didn't, right? We know that this is still going on, the hate towards African Americans. That's the solution. So educating ourselves is the greatest history, that our understanding solution that no one can take away from us. And being able to connect at that level of empathy. And acknowledging that we're Black. I can't say this enough, you know, to acknowledge that you're Black is the best gift you can give to African Americans, right? We have a beautiful culture, you know, we are able to identify and trace our roots, right? We're able to go back to our great-grandparents' burial site, and we're fortunate to have that. But however, that doesn't give us the license to not be curious about African Americans, not to mention in the eyes of a racist, conservative racist person, we're all Black. They're not going to see your culture. It is very important to identify with their experience. It's really important to empathize and encourage that we think beyond ourselves, you know, and the need, all they need, I think, and I spoke to my husband who's African American. What do you think African Americans need from Habesha people? He said they need gratitude, you know, and African Americans came first, right? They fought for us, and they understanding that they gave us this gift of existing in a white America, you know, and some can argue it's Native American America, but understanding that we're benefiting from their fight. And that is empathy to me, understanding that we are reaping the benefits of Black people's fight.
I love that.
And we owe it to them, right? We owe it to them. There's no other way of getting out. We owe it to our children that we're benefiting from their struggle. We as Black people are still treated as second-class citizens. You know, look up to, teach your children civil rights movement and teach your children affirmative action, right? Mm-hmm. These are two major events that we continue to benefit from. These are events that haven't stopped to benefit us, right? Part of the solution is to obviously avoid stereotype that you must be a bad African American to be killed by the police, because we're afraid of our kids may end up somewhere. We tell them, if you're a good person, if you go to college, if you read books, that you'll be safe. Let's stop that stereotype. Like that is not true. There's been physicians killed by cops. You know, that's not the talk we need to have. Okay, this is particularly for our people who believe, this may not apply to any of you, but if you have, you know, any Habesha person who believes that they're not Black, it may seem difficult, you know, to identify as a Black person for them, but to let them know your culture is beautiful. It's great that you're able to, you know, trace your roots, but your culture won't matter to a white person, you know? It just won't. And so that goes out the window when they identify you as Black, right? The culture becomes a way, way less important when you're perceived as a threat. Especially if we have sons, we have to, you know, not give them the illusion that you're safe because you're Habesha. Let's see, excuse me. And another thing is that we know, as especially if for the younger, if you're in your 40s, 30s, you know, you likely have parents, you know, who may not have access to what you have access to. I do believe that it is our responsibility to teach our parents what they don't know. Some of it is ignorance because they're not educated and they're not able to read. So they stick to what they know, which is, again, the media, right? Mm-hmm. Or what so-and-so said to me. Oh, so-and-so said that, you know, this is how they are. And that's what I've decided. And so, you know, challenge that thinking. And things are easier to learn and share for us, you know, they are limited. They don't have the access that we have. And so I think it's important to use technology and educate, show them videos, you know. And that part of the solution that I do believe that recognizing that healing is sometimes, it comes with pain. It's not comfortable, it's not pretty, right? Knowing that in order for us to get to the healing, which is at the end of the road, we're gonna have some uncomfortable discussions in the process on the road. So we have to confront the issues as they are and not as we wish they are, and have those difficult conversations. And we as Habesha people have the responsibility to be allies to our African American brothers and sisters, right? And we are Black, but we have the responsibility to jump in and join them in their fight. And, you know, it's very important to say I'm going to fight because it's the right thing to do. Also because I owe you. And speaking against injustice, and someone mentioned in the comments, and support Black businesses. My thoughts are I'm all for supporting Black businesses, to answer your question. And I think Naomi is going to speak on this, but I can't emphasize enough as a form of solution that there are opportunities to donate to organizations that are fighting racism in this country. There are plenty of organizations. I can't be biased and tell you which one. Do your research on which one you value or your values match up. And local elections matter, you know, figure out which local people are running for office, and police officers, police chief who selects police officers, you know, and trainings for the same police officers who are killing us. The mayor selects that chief of police, right? And we select the mayor. And so being able to be conscious about who you're electing and who cares for Black lives, and going after that value of Black Lives Matter, and just joining the fight that way, you know. And just study. You can have a study group during election time. Have a group of your girlfriends and come together and have a discussion. You can bring someone from the community to teach you, but there's always an opportunity to learn about during election season. Don't go blindly, but like understanding who's running. There's plenty of fundraisers. You can go to fundraisers and understand the people's values, or read about them online, because those local elections are, you know, so key to where we are. And your next question was, what do we know about empathy in our culture versus Western culture? And I do believe that culture, so in our culture, and I'm open to learning in the comment section from you, but I do believe that our culture is rooted in empathy. Our Habesha culture is encourages us to think collectively, communally. For example, if someone is born, or, you know, we have like the 12 days, we have the baptism, we have the child's birthday. If someone graduates from kindergarten to PhD, we're there to celebrate with them. If someone dies, we show up within an hour to be with them, right? I do believe that our culture is beautiful. We come from this village-centered mentality culture, but we're only sticking together, right? But I do also believe that living abroad now, we are, can you all hear me still?
Yes, we can still hear you.
My AirPod died, but I'll be right.
We can hear you.
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I think that some of the Western culture is rubbing off on us a little bit, and that our empathy level may not be as how it would be when we were back home, you know, and because we're in an individualistic society that is training us to think with the I or me first, like I go first, my needs go first. And so we may be struggling with connecting or empathizing with others. And I hope that you had some takeaways from this moment that I just shared with you. I hope that you're able to connect and be curious about African Americans and empathize with their experience and not assume, you know, and think as we collectively mentality is I hope you take away from this, and always remember that love always wins. And I have a fun fact. The fun fact is that empathetic people are happier people and a lot more pleasure to be around. And I hope that you can take that away from my presentation. Thank you again, Berry, for having me, including me in this discussion. I hope we can continue this, and Black Lives Matter, we matter.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Almaz. That was amazing. Lots of great points to take away. I love that you said that in asking your husband what we as a Habesha community can do for African Americans, and that is to be grateful. I love that you said that, and that we have a responsibility to be allies and to fight with them right now. That's so important. One of the things that has hit me, maybe because I live in a predominantly white American area, is that a lot of the people that I've been seeing out there on the streets and protesting and marching are white Americans. And a lot of times I wonder, like, where are all the, like, you know, other races? So yeah, I think we do definitely need to remember that, especially as moms who are raising Black sons, and you know, the future depends on us making that change now, or else they're going to be confronted with these same circumstances. But
Absolutely.
yes, God willing, we will change that this time around. Thank you for all of the great information. That was awesome. Thank you, Almaz.
Thank you, ladies, for having me.